Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Live Chat with James, coming to you from the ProPix TV studios in Vancouver, British Columbia. Tonight, we're going to take a look at the Edgewood standoff, a case of birds' biosecurity and belief. Now, before you start putting your opinions out there about myself, just so you're aware, I am bringing you facts, and if you are interested in where the facts come from and the sources that have been quoted or utilized, that will be available on our Substack channel after the show. So you're welcome to look at any of the reference material utilized. Now, once again, this will be looking at both sides of the argument and in an unbiased way, as most people know that my personal opinion will be separate from what I'm reporting tonight. For those interested, yes, I do personally believe that the ostriches should be retested and that any decision should be pending until those test results come in from a third-party lab. So that's just to start things off. But again, as a journalist, I am going to bring this presentation with information from both sides and try to make sure that people understand the argument from the perspective of the farm and the perspective of the Food Inspection Agency and how that all comes together. Now, it is a very emotional and polarizing issue that has struck a lot of chords with people around the world. We also know that foreign politicians and celebrities have weighed in on the issue, but again, we are going to take a look at what's happening there in Edgewood, and we will move on here. Now, also just as a preempt, I have been to the ostrich farm, and I've looked into the eyes of these beautiful birds. And so again, I am going to try to keep my personal opinions out of it this evening and move on from the perspective of both sides to try to give a balanced report here. Now, you may not agree with some of what I say, but it is backed by the facts or documentation or the legal proceedings itself. As that is the case, of course, we know that some people do not trust science. Some people think that there's conspiracy, while others think that it is an issue that should be handled in the courts as opposed to the matter of public opinion. Now, let's get started, folks. It's a standoff in Edgewood, as we are all aware. On the quiet rural landscape of Edgewood in British Columbia, a tense and almost a surreal standoff has captured national and international attention. On the one side stands, of course, the Universal Ostrich Farm, and also known as the UOF. Now, surrounded by a camp of protesters and supporters fueled by a narrative of government overreach, and of course, a profound emotional connection to these beautiful birds. The animals within are the subject of the debate. Now, on the other side, of course, methodical presence of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, or the CFIA, the federal body that's now in the legal custody of the birds, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Now, let's take a look at the RCMP. The role of the RCMP is not as enforcers of the cull. They are there as peacekeepers in a volatile situation, tasked with ensuring the safety of all parties, not just the CFIA, or CFAI. They are there to protect all parties involved. Now, they have that task. The air is thick, though, with mistrust, legal uncertainty, and, of course, the unresolved fate of over 300 ostriches. This is a story of two irreconcilable, realities for the farm and the owners, as well as their supporters. These are healthy, surviving animals, pets with names like Lulu and Q-Tip that have heroically overcome disease and now represent a unique opportunity for scientific research. To the Government of Canada, the same flock occupies an infected premises, as they describe it, a persistent reservoir for a uniquely dangerous strain of the H5N1 avian influenza that poses a significant and ongoing threat to animal health, human health, and the Canadian economy. Now, the standoff in Edgewood has become a flashpoint, forcing a critical examination of where the line falls between an individual's right to protect their property, the emotional weight of animal welfare, and the state's non-negotiable duty to enforce science-based policy to protect an entire country from the catastrophic potential of zoonotic disease outbreaks. Now, this report, we are going to dissect the science, the law, and the competing narratives to understand how this impasse was reached and what the outcome could mean for future disease management in Canada. Now, let's first start and take a look at the outbreak and the anatomy of a crisis. Okay, now this sparked, of course, in December of 2024 for this particular situation. As I said, the crisis began quietly in December of 2024, and the Universal Ostrich Farm experienced a sudden onset of flu-like symptoms among its flock, leading to the deaths of 25 to 30 ostriches within a 3-week period. By January the 15th, 2025, the death toll had climbed to 69 birds from an original herd of approximately 468, representing a mortality rate of nearly 15%. As that happened, a crucial element that shaped the entire conflict was the farm's failure to report this significant mortality event. The HPAI, or highly pathogenic avian influenza, is a federally reportable disease under the Health of Animals Act, meaning that all bird owners, veterinarians, and laboratories are legally obligated to immediately notify the CFIA of any suspected cases. The farm did not self-report. The CFIA was only alerted to the situation on December the 28th, 2024, after receiving an anonymous third-party report. This initial decision not to engage with the regulatory system as required immediately cast a subsequent government intervention not as a collaboration with a concerned farmer, but instead it was seen as an enforcement action into a potential unreported disease outbreak. This established an adversarial dynamic that has persisted through every stage of the legal and public battle, transitioning and transforming a public health issue into a confrontation from day one. Now, the diagnosis and the pathogen. Okay, following the anonymous tip, the CFIA acted swiftly, verbally imposing a quarantine order and visiting the farm to collect samples from 2 of the deceased ostriches. Now, on December the 31st, 2024, the Canadian Animal Health Surveillance Network laboratory confirmed the samples tested positive for H5 avian influenza using what is called a polymerase chain reaction, or PCR testing. The virus was later specified as the highly pathogenic H5N1 subtype. Now, that same day, the CFIA issued a formal notice to dispose ordering the humane and, of course, depopulation of the entire remaining flock. The diagnostic method, PCR testing, is the global gold standard for the early and reliable detection of avian influenza. It is a highly sensitive and specific molecular test capable of detecting even low viral loads, which minimizes the likelihood of false negative results. Keep in mind, it reduces the likelihood. It does not eliminate false positives or false negatives, okay? So just keep that in mind as well. Now, samples are typically collected via mouth or throat or colloquial swabs and must be analyzed in specialized containment laboratories to ensure accuracy. The positive results from the 2 birds that had died with symptoms identical to the other 67 deceased birds provide a scientifically sound and legally defensible basis for declaring the entire flock as infected, and of course, the premises as contaminated. Now, subsequently, more detailed analysis by the CFIA's National Center for Foreign Animal Disease in Winnipeg revealed a critical fact that has been largely overlooked in the public debate. The virus at the Universal Ostrich Farm was not a reassortment, was not a typical H5N1 strain, but it was a novel reassortment, not previously seen in Canada, one that contained the D1.3 genotype. Now, further laboratory analysis showed the novel virus was significantly more dangerous than other circulating strains. It demonstrated enhanced pathogenicity and proving lethal to mice in 4 to 5 days, even at very low doses. That is important to keep in mind. Now, by comparison, other H5N1 genotypes, such as the B13.13 strain found in U.S. dairy cattle, required substantially higher doses, and that was to cause the mortality over a similar time frame. So it shows the difference there from a scientific standpoint. Now, most alarmingly, genomic sequencing provided irrefutable evidence of a direct epidemiological link between the BC farm and outbreaks south of the border. This analysis showed that the virus from the Universal Ostrich Farm was the direct genetic ancestor of the H5N1 D1.3 viruses that later caused outbreaks in Ohio and Missouri. Just because it is the same and linked, folks, it does not mean it came from the Universal Ostrich Farm. More likely, it came from a wild bird or through a chain of contacts between wild birds or other animals. And this is important to keep in mind, as I do not want anybody walking away with the misthought or misinformation or misperceived as it being started at the Universal Ostrich Farm, because that would be an unfair and inaccurate statement. Now, the same D1.3 genotype has been associated with human infection in a poultry worker in Ohio. Now, this scientific evidence fundamentally changes the stakes of the Edgewood standoff. The public narrative often frames the issue as a localized dispute over one farm's animals. However, the NCFAD's genomic data elevates the situation entirely. Now, the virus that we were talking about was identified as novel, more lethal as a strain. Genomic epidemiology then proved it did not stay contained but migrated from the BC farm to cause outbreaks in the United States. Again, this is what is reported as the facts there. Now, transferred from wild birds and so forth, I think is more likely. But again, that is my thought, not the fact. So again, I like to keep those very clearly defined so that there's no misunderstanding. Now, this transforms the Universal Ostrich Farm from a passive victim of a virus into an active, proven source of continental disease spread. This evidence directly contradicts the farm's narrative that no surviving birds pose any risk or threat, and elevates the CFIA's imperative to act from a matter of national policy to one of international biosecurity. The legal delays did not just pause a local action, they allowed a proven threat to continue to exist and, as evidence suggests, to spread. Now, let's take a look at the policy, the stamping out policy that we're talking about, and also known as the stamping out doctrine. Now, it is a global standard, and the CFIA's response to the HPAI outbreak at the Universal Ostrich Farm is not arbitrary or improvised. It is a dictated policy that is the internationally recognized standard for controlling HPAI as defined and recommended by the World Organization for Animal Health. Now, in Canada, along with its major trading partners, we adhere to this policy as a core component of its animal health, public health, and trade agreements. So again, this is a policy that's coming in from an international level, not just a local, regional, provincial, or Canadian level. Now, the primary goal of the stamping out policy is the swift and total eradication of the virus from an infected area to prevent its mutation and spread. The policy is a multi-step process that includes the humane depopulation of all infected and exposed animals on an infected premises, the establishment of strict quarantines and movement controls in a designated primary control zone around the premises, Now, the rigorous cleaning and disinfection of the infected premises, including all equipment, buildings, and contaminated materials. The rationale and why they look at culling the entire flock, that's a central point of public confusion and emotional outrage that is at the behest of the policy's requirement to cull the entire flock, including birds that appear healthy. The farm and its supporters have repeatedly demanded that surviving birds be tested individually to prove that they are not a threat. Now, the CFIA's refusal to do so is based on established veterinary science and public health principles. First, the policy targets the infected premises, not just visibly sick birds. Once the HPAI is confirmed through laboratory testing, the entire farm, including all birds, the soil they walk on, and the water they drink and equipment used to care for them, is considered contaminated. And that is, of course, considered contaminated with the source of that virus. Now, the goal is to eliminate this entire reservoir of infection. The second point is the risk of asymptomatic carriers. Birds that survive HPAI infection may not show any clinical signs of illness, but can continue to carry and shed the virus. These outwardly healthy birds can act as a silent source of infection for other animals, including migratory wild birds that can spread the pathogen across vast geographical areas, as we discussed earlier. Now, third, the reliability of testing surviving birds for immunity is questionable. According to Angela Rasmussen, a virologist at the University of Saskatchewan, older ostriches often do not develop a robust antibody response to viruses like avian flu, meaning tests cannot reliably determine whether they have immunity. Furthermore, she states that simply having antibodies does not guarantee immunity to H5N1. This means a bird could still be a vector for disease. The virus can also persist in the farm environment long after the birds have recovered, posing a constant risk of reinfection. Finally, the Canadian courts have reportedly affirmed that the CFIA's position should be upheld. Both the federal court and the Federal Court of Appeal have ruled that the critical legal question is whether the CFIA's decision to issue the cull order was reasonable based on the scientific evidence available at the time the order was issued in December. So again, that limits what the courts can actually hear in terms of new evidence. And that is why some people are upset that they are refusing to review new evidence or to have new scientific specialists come in and give evidence. And again, because they have to only look at, and this is very important in terms of the legal standpoint, that they are looking at what was reasonable of the cull order based on the scientific evidence available at the time the order was issued in December 2024. So again, I just thought that was important to repeat, as it does have a huge bearing on the legal standing in the legal case moving forward and those decisions that have been already made by the lower courts. Now, the fact that the birds appear healthy many months later, a situation created by the farm's own legal delays, is considered immaterial to the validity of the original order. Again, this is the decisions and the reasoning behind the courts. Now, the urgency of this policy is not merely about stopping the current spread. It is a race against a viral evolution. An influenza virus circulating in a large, partially exposed flock is a living laboratory for mutation. The longer that the virus is allowed to replicate, the higher the probability that it could reassort with other influenza viruses or adapt to become more easily transmissible between mammals, including humans. The discovery of that the virus at the Universal Ostrich Farm was already a novel reassortment with enhanced pathogenicity, proves that this is not a theoretical risk, but a demonstrated reality. From a virological perspective, the stamping out policy is a preemptive strike against the virus's evolutionary potential. The farm's legal delays have effectively given a dangerous pathogen more time to roll the genetic dice. As we look at the economic imperative, and again, just bear with me as we get through all of the information as I'm trying to bring the full picture into focus here. Now, beyond the immediate animal and public health risks, the stamping out policy is critical to protecting Canada's national economy. The Canadian poultry and egg industry is valued at $6.8 billion annually, with the international exports accounting for $1.75 billion of that total. This entire economic engine is predicated on Canada maintaining its international status as a country that can effectively control and eradicate animal diseases. Failure to adhere to the international standards set by the World Organization of Animal Health triggers immediate and severe trade restrictions from other countries. In response to the ongoing HPAI detections, the United States Department of Agriculture has already banned the import of poultry and poultry products from specific control zones in Canada, including the one in British Columbia where the Universal Ostrich Farm is located. The stomping out policy, by creating clearly defined control zones and demonstrating a rapid, effective response, is the mechanism that allows Canada to contain outbreaks and persuade trading partners to limit restrictions only to those affected areas, thereby allowing trade to continue from the vast majority of the country that remains disease-free. A failure to act decisively at the Universal Ostrich Farm would signal to the world that Canada is unable or unwilling to control HPAI, jeopardizing the livelihoods of thousands of farmers and threatening the stability of a national food supply. Now, let's take a look at the resistance and the farm's fight for survival. This is, of course, what we are here to look at. Now, when we look at defining the farm, is it commercial operation or is it a family pet farm or hobby farm, as some would refer to it? Excuse me, folks. Now, a key element. Sorry, I'm just going to make sure our chat is on. Yes, it is. So feel free to put your comments up in the chat, folks. You're more than welcome to interact. Our phone lines are also open at 604-385-5093. If you want to call in and have your say, you're more than welcome to do so. Now, excuse me. A key element of the public-facing campaign by the Ostrich Farm has been its self-portrayal as a small family operation with beloved pets that are part of the family. This narrative has been highly effective in garnering public support and sympathy. However, an examination of the farm's scale, activities, and the CFIA's regulatory framework indicates that it is functioning as a commercial entity. Now, the CFIA's classification system for poultry farms is clear. As of November the 9th, 2023, a premises is considered commercial if it is outside of the supply management system and has 1,000 or more birds or 300 or more ducks, geese, and such. Now, those are called anseriiformes or forms. And again, that is like ducks and geese. And they are kept for selling their products or for breeding. With a flock size estimated between 300 and 400 ostriches, the Universal Ostrich Farm meets the scale requirement for a commercial operation. Furthermore, the farm engages in clear commercial activity. The owners have confirmed that they use the birds for byproducts, including animal feed, oil products, feathers, and leather. The farm, and I will repeat that because I think that some people may miss this point, is that the owners have confirmed that they use the birds for byproducts, including animal feed, oil products, feathers, and leather. Okay, so just to be clear. Now, the farm is also directly linked to the Anu Skincare and Essence of the Nile brands, which market and sell skincare products made from ostrich oil. Under the CFIA regulations, any operation that manufactures livestock feed for sale is considered a commercial feed mill and is subject to federal oversight. These activities place the farm squarely under the purview of the federal regulations governing animal health. It also puts them under the restrictions and regulations for biosecurity and food safety. The farm is also claimed to be a research facility studying ostrich immunity, at one point suggesting a collaboration with a Japanese lab. However, the CFIA has stated in official communications that it has received no evidence of any legitimate scientific research being conducted at the premises. Now, from my personal understanding here, just to give it some context, is that the owners of the farm were looking to work with the Kyoto University, I believe it was, in Japan, and they, from my understanding, hadn't started that partnership yet, but it was in the works. So just for clarification on that, of my understanding as opposed to what's in the actual facts of the information that's available. The agency also noted that the farm's physical facilities are not suitable for the kind of controlled research activities or trials that would be required for such a study, and that no research documentation was ever provided during the multiple legal proceedings. Now, the farm's identity appears to be a fluid concept, strategically adapted for different audiences. To the courts of the CFIA, the initial argument was based on the ostriches possessing rare and valuable genetics. When the legal argument failed, the narrative pivoted to that of a scientific research facility. To the public and on social media, the operation is framed as a family farm with named pets. The shifting narrative has been a powerful public relations tool designed to elicit sympathy and frame the conflict as a David and Goliath battle against a faceless bureaucracy. However, it does obscure the farm's actual status as a commercial entity that is, by law, subject to the same federal regulations as any other large-scale livestock operation in the country. Again, very important facts, but the legal gambit and the quarantine breaches, let's go there for just a few minutes and look at that. Now, the farm's owners have mounted a prolonged and determined legal challenge to the CFIA's cull order. The legal strategy successfully delayed the execution order for over 9 months. The case progressed from the federal court, which in May 2025 dismissed the farm's application and ruled that the CFIA's decisions were reasonable and procedurally fair, to the Federal Court of Appeal. Now, of course, we look at this as it continues. Now, as I said, the Federal Court of Appeal, which unanimously upheld the lower court's ruling in August of 2025. Finally, in a surprising turn, a single judge of the Supreme Court of Canada granted a temporary stay of the order in September 2025, pausing all action while the full court considers whether to grant the farm leave to appeal. Again, on a side note, from a personal point, I was there when that announcement was made. It was very emotional, it was very exciting, and it alleviated a lot of stress for the moment. But that, again, just my observations being there at the time that announcement was made. But I'll leave that again, and we'll go back to this actual report here. Now, the farm's resistance was not confined to the courtroom. Official CFIA statements and court documents detail a pattern of systemic noncompliance with the Health of Animals Act. This pattern includes the following is what is brought forward or accused by the CFIA statements and the court documents. Failure to report, of course, the initial failure to notify the CFIA of the mass deaths in December of 2024, which is a legal requirement. Number 2 is a failure to adhere to quarantine orders. Now, the farm repeatedly breached its quarantine by inviting the public onto the infected premises. This included hosting events such as a concert featuring Freedom Convoy organizer Tamara Litch. an action that directly contravenes fundamental biocontainment protocols designed to prevent the spread of a dangerous pathogen. Okay, that pathogen is very much dangerous if that is indeed what it is. Now, failure to implement the basic biosecurity measures is point number 3, and that is the CFIA noting that the farm failed to take appropriate steps to mitigate risks such as improving fencing to limit access by wild birds, a known vector for the virus, I might add, or controlling water runoff from the designated quarantine zone to other parts of the farm. As a result of this noncompliance, the CFIA issued 2 notices of violation with the penalties totaling $20,000. When the CFIA officials escorted by the RCMP arrived in September 2025 to execute their lawfully obtained warrant, the farm's co-owners, and her daughter were arrested for obstructing the officers from performing their duties. This, again, was something that was heavily reported on, and you can take a look at that. Now, let's take a look at the periphery. Collateral issues and unseen risks, and that's where the blue lines roll. It's peacekeeping, not culling. Now, public perception, often fueled by social media, has at times conflated the roles of the RCMP and the CFIA at the Edgewood Farm. It's crucial to delineate their distinct mandates. The RCMP's role, as stated by their own officers, is to explicitly keep the peace and enforce the law while the CFIA agents conduct their business. They are present on site to ensure the safety of the CFIA officials, the farm owners, and the protesters, and to ensure that lawfully obtained court orders and warrants can be executed without violence or obstruction. They are not involved in the actual culling process itself. And that is very important to really accentuate and to bring to light. Again, the police are not there to be involved in the actual culling of the herd or of the flock, Now, the RCMP's law enforcement role has also expanded to address several collateral issues that have emerged from the standoff. They are actively investigating numerous complaints from local businesses of threats, intimidation, and harassment. Police have reported escalating threats of violence, including shooting threats directed at companies merely suspected of being contracted by the CFIA to provide logistical support. Now, this has created a climate of fear in the local community. Furthermore, the RCMP is investigating a violent assault and alleged arson attempt on a 72-year-old neighbor of the farm, allegedly perpetrated by an individual associated with the protest camp that has been established on the property. Now, from police statements and information, they did make one arrest. The individual has been released. However, it's also just as important to state that everyone associated with the farm in any official capacity, from owners to other really long-term supporters, are stating very clearly and very loudly to anybody that's coming from out of town to support the cause that it is to be peaceful, that it is to be respectful, that it is not to interfere with the warrants and the duties of the police or the CFIA, but instead to have a peaceful protest and try through all legal and diplomatic processes to try and win this matter over. They are not wanting anybody, once again, they do not want anybody to act in violence, intimidation, or any threatening manner to members of the community or anybody else. It is really going against their message and the whole process. And it also takes away from those who are supporting the cause when they see people acting in a violent or threatening manner. Again, the Universal Ostrich Farm needs all of the support from the community and the public. And by people outside of that circle who think they're helping by doing these acts of threats of violence and that, they're actually doing a disservice to the farm and to the owners. So please keep that in mind as well. The farm's public campaign, while often framed as peaceful, has created an environment where some supporters feel justified in targeting and threatening uninvolved local businesses and residents. Now, the farm spokesperson and online supporters have identified potential contractors, leading to a flood of intimidating calls and emails. This demonstrates how online rhetoric can manifest as real world intimidation and, of course, violence, forcing the RCMP to take on a broader law enforcement role to protect the wider community from the fallout of the dispute. Now, also keep in mind that some people have been just inundating companies' reviews and online feedback. And this again creates, first of all, it's improper and false reviews of companies in order to try to damage their businesses for what you see as potential involvement. And again, a lot of these companies were not even involved in any way, shape, or form. It was just rumors, innuendos, or insinuations. So again, it shows how damaging that this can be, because a lot of people do use the internet to find reviews and referrals for businesses they tend to deal with or are contemplating dealing with. Now, the PPE question is something that also brings up a lot of debate online, and that's understanding the biosecurity zones. A point of confusion and misinformation among observers has been the sight of some personnel on the farm property not wearing personal protective equipment or PPE. Now, this has been used by some to argue that the threat is not as serious as officials claim. However, the CFIA's explanation aligns with the standard internationally accepted biosecurity protocols, as infected sites like the Universal Ostrich Farm is not treated as a single monolithic area. Instead, it is divided into designated zones to manage contamination. The hot zone is the area of highest risk. In this case, the pens and the enclosures where the birds are housed and where the virus is presumed to be present in the environment. Now, any individual entering this designated hot zone must wear full PPE, including masks, goggles, gloves, and coveralls. Now, conversely, individuals operating in cold or warm zones, those are areas of the property outside the direct quarantine perimeter where logistical support and command operations are located, and they are not required to wear the same level of PPE. A strict protocol of disinfection is enforced for any personnel or equipment moving from a hot zone to a cleaner zone. This tiered, zone-based approach is a standard and effective method for preventing the spread of disease from a contaminated site while still allowing necessary logical operations to occur safely. Now, when we look at the ostrich oil connection and the byproduct risk, a significant public health concern arising from this case is the farm's connection to the skincare products. The Universal Ostrich Farm is linked to the Honor Skincare and potentially Essence of the Nile brands, which market ostrich oil as a natural hypoallergenic product rich in omega fatty acids. The product has reportedly been promoted for use on cuts and burns, which would represent a direct pathway for a pathogen to enter the body through compromised skin. The risk of zoonotic disease transmission, such as H5N1, is a serious consideration for any product derived from animal sources. The H5N1 virus can be transmitted through direct contact with infected animal products, including feces, mucus, saliva, and potentially raw fat or oil. Applying a contaminated, unprocessed product to broken skin would constitute high-risk exposure for contamination through the skin, and that is a percutaneous transmission is what it's referred to. Now, the safety of the final ostrich oil product depends entirely on the processing method used to extract the oil from the fat. When you take a look at rendering, it's an industrial process that uses high heat and pressure for an extended period, and that's generally 40 to 90 minutes. Now, this process is proven to kill pathogens, including the avian influenza virus, making rendered products like soaps and some cosmetics, and any products that use that as an ingredient makes them safe. Now, when you look at cold pressing or other low heat processing methods, that's different. That would not reach the temperatures required for viral inactivation. Now, studies on H5N1 in other raw animal products, such as milk, show that the virus can remain infectious for weeks at refrigerated temperatures. While there's no specific data available for ostrich fat, the principle established for other raw animal products is clear. Without a sufficient heat treatment step, a significant risk of viability could remain. Under the Food and Drugs Act and cosmetic regulations, Health Canada requires that all cosmetics sold in Canada be manufactured under sanitary conditions and be safe for use. However, it is unclear if the specific risk of zoonotic virus transmission from a raw ingredient sourced from a known HPAI-infected premises is being actively monitored in this particular case. The potential for an unprocessed or minimally processed product from these ostriches to enter the cosmetic supply chain represents a tangible public health risk. Not to be understated, but not to be confused with the different processes. Now, the following table that we have generated and we will put on our Substack site or our Substack account, and that's a scientific understanding of the H5N1 virus viability in various animal byproducts and the effectiveness of common processing methods. Now, I will again put this chart up on our site for you to take a look and to review that if you wish. Now, the situation of the Universal Ostrich Farm remains frozen in a state of legal and, of course, logistical limbo. The CFIA has official custody of the birds on the farm, providing daily feed, water, and care under veterinary oversight, while all parties await the Supreme Court of Canada's decision on whether it will grant leave to hear the farm's final appeal. The fate of the ostriches and the resolution of this protracted conflict now hangs in the balance of a high-level legal determination of whether the case raises an issue of sufficient public importance to be heard by the nation's highest court. This case has transcended a simple animal health issue. It's become a proxy battleground for broader societal debates about institutional trust, scientific authority, and individual liberty. The farm's narrative of fighting government overreach has resonated deeply with a segment of the population conditioned by recent global events to be skeptical of public health mandates. The CFIA, meanwhile, is bound by its legal mandate under the Health of Animals Act and its international obligations under the WOAH, or the World Organization of Animal Health. It has been forced to defend a scientifically sound but publicly unpopular policy in the face of intense emotional, political, and legal pressure. The Edgewood standoff is more than a story about ostriches. It is truly a case study in the immense challenges of managing public health in the 21st century, an era where misinformation can spread faster than any virus. The farm's successful use of legal delays and social media campaigns to obstruct a critical disease control action for months on end sets a potentially dangerous precedent. Regardless of the Supreme Court's final decision, this case forces a difficult question upon Canadians. In the face of a proven, evolving, and potentially catastrophic zoonotic threat, how much risk is society willing to tolerate in the name of challenging these very policies that they were designed to protect it? Now, of course, we've looked at this, and we can look at the side from the farm. And again, we see a lot of information that is released online. We see a lot on social media. We see a lot from armchair scientists, as I call them, who think that they have the answers when they haven't understood a word of science since the 5th grade. Others, there are professionals and those with knowledge and experience and training that also contradict what the processes are and what the claims are. Again, we have to look at it from a totality of the different inputs, the different policies and the regulations, and understand that the people at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency are not the ones that we need to blame. If there is a blame, and I'm saying if there is, we need to look at each other. We need to look at ourselves because we allowed it to get to this point without taking a stand and demanding that politicians change the regulations or the laws. We have not worked with international partners to try and find some grounds in which we can find a negotiated agreement or special exemptions and exceptions for certain farms and certain circumstances. This is what it really comes down to, is that we have laid back and allowed these policies to be implemented and enforced without any real concern until one case sparks the public interest, that sparks international outrage, and it brings the whole policy to light where people have not really even heard of the policies before, let alone being this familiar or impacted by them. It is a clear method of trying to control zoonotic outbreaks, H5N1 and others, to look at the culling or the stamp out policies. When you look at other issues of animal viral infections or diseases, whether that's bovine disease or swine flu and others, there are policies and regulations in place. Once again, people look at those and say, but they are a direct source into the food chain. However, if the ostrich farm is using the ostriches in part as animal feed products or byproducts, then of course that again could potentially expose all of the animals that are feeding on that to become infected with a mutated form. That is pretty much, in a nutshell, what you're looking at in terms of the whole overview of the situation from all sides. We know that it can be emotional. We know that there is a beauty in these birds that cannot be seen in others. Their eyes, different colors, just like people. They have eyelashes that just, wiggle in the wind as they look at you and size you up and have that questioning look in their face. Almost one begging for attention and approval from the people around it. And that makes it even more difficult to differentiate these from pets and lovable creatures to something that could potentially disrupt the global supply chain when it comes to food safety and handling. That it could come with a very high cost in the billions of dollars when it comes to foreign trade and exports, or the billions of dollars that could be impacted in the Canadian farming industry. It's become a very polarizing issue, and it's one that people have very, very strong opinions on one way or the other. I would encourage you to place your opinions in the comment section. I encourage you to call in before the end of the show with your opinions or what you would like to say about it. And that number is 604-385-5093. You're welcome to call in and have your voice heard. Of course, we've had a lot of people in the promotion of this episode bringing up opinions and insults and all kinds of thoughts. However, not one of them have called in to this show while we're live. Not one person wants to have their voice on air. That's fine. I respect that. But at the same time, if you are not willing to call in and voice your opinion and instead just want to push it online, it comes to question whether or not you are a bot whether or not you are just someone that is a provocateur trying to really create more distrust between both sides and stir the pot, as they say, or if you actually have legitimate thoughts and concerns, which I respect. I mean, I do not. My personal opinions, my personal thoughts don't necessarily align with this science. My personal opinion is test every bird. Find out if there is immunity. Find out if there is research applicable information that can be derived from this. But again, the role or the goal of tonight's episode was strictly to look at the documented and scientific information that is available and that is out there. To bring it to you in a fair way that was not biased from either side. It was just the facts as they are. And again, any of my personal opinions, I very clearly stated, are my personal feelings or opinions and not a part of the information that's scientific, legal, or other. With that, folks, the phones are silent tonight, as are the chat rooms. So with that, I think that we will wrap up a few minutes early. We were going to go right through till 9 or longer if required. But given that we are not getting any real involvement from anybody online or on the phone lines, we will let this go at this time and end the series or end the show. This has been James with Live Chat with James on ProPix TV. We encourage you to get involved, to like, follow, and subscribe to keep up on the episodes and other programs that we share here on this platform and on others. So once again, thank you for tuning in. Stay safe out there, folks.